Thank you. Yeah, I see it now. I see.
Nothing, just a second.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is that what you want to do?
No.
I think it is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Bill is here with us. He's going to talk to you about the black troops during the Civil War.
Yeah, we're going to talk about, actually it says the formation, but we're going to talk about the experiences of the United States colored troops in the Civil War. The black experience in the Civil War was just as complicated as the white experience. But we're going to focus in not so much the black population, but actually the troops that actually fight in the Union Army, not so much the Union Navy, the Union Army. Okay, when you talk about black troops in the Civil War, what's the first thing you think about? A movie what?
Glory, yeah, I was gonna
Glory.
say Battle.
So I decided tonight not to talk. I'm going to turn on the movie for you guys. The whole story, okay? Here's the problem, okay? The 54th Massachusetts, which is the star that which the movie revolves around, has given to that movie has given to the 54th New York the same notoriety and fame that the movie Gettysburg and the book Killer Angels gives to Joshua Chamberlain. The Band of Brothers gives to Major Winters, okay? But there was a lot more to it. In fact, the 54th Massachusetts wasn't even the only black regiment formed out in Massachusetts at that time. There were two regiments we'll talk about, the 54th and the 55th Regiment, okay? But because of that movie, the 54th has come to be seen almost as an elite unit in the American Civil War. And why wouldn't you be an elite unit? You got Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman and Andre Braugher in that regiment. The movie has a lot of Hollywood in it, particularly the battle scenes. I don't know if you ever remember the scene before they attack and they got the artillery about 10 yards behind the troops. That never happened unless there was the enemy firing into you, okay? But what is realistic about that movie is the prejudice, the difficulties these black soldiers faced, and the prejudice they experienced. And it wasn't just prejudice that they were receiving from the enemy. It was their own brother soldiers, the white Union soldiers that are going to be, that they're going to experience, okay? Now, any of you guys who've had the misfortune to listen to me talk on other issues, either here on the battlefield of Gettysburg, I'm fascinated by individual regiments, because I've always felt that we tend to look at it as Civil War as like on an overview. I like to look at individual regiments, where they were raised, where these guys came from, who were their commanders, what were their experiences before the war, because none of these guys were born to fight in the Civil War. It wasn't like when they were 1 year old, they said, okay, you're going to be in the 54th Massachusetts 25 years from now, and you're going to be fighting in the Civil War. They lived their lives like we did, okay? So the 54th Massachusetts, great story, but it was only one of 175 black regiments that fought in the Civil War. So I'm not going to concentrate on just the 54th. I won't bore you guys by going into all 175 other regiments. We're going to look at a broad overview of the experiences that they have. When the firing at Fort Sumter happened, both sides, South, are going to start to raise troops. And you started to see, all of a sudden, you'll start to see recruitment posters all throughout the North, encouraging men to fight, to join the army and to fight in their respective armies. At the time of the battle of Fort Sumter, this was going to be a white man's war. It's going to be even though the basic dispute was about slavery. This was going to be a white man's war, okay? In the South, you guys were just talking about it, okay? There's no way that they could have started to arm slaves and form them into regiments, even though as time went on, pressure got great. Very few, their whole basis of existence was based on slavery. They're not going to start to arm their slaves. Okay, very few people in the Confederacy advocated that. The one most famous one is Pat Claiborne, Irish-born, and probably didn't, wasn't raised so much in that Southern mentality. He's going to. I don't know about you guys, but in my opinion, I think he was one of the best division commanders in the Civil War.
Stonewall of the West.
Was that?
Stonewall of the West.
Yeah, and he probably would have probably been one of the best corps commanders. He will never become a corps commander. He will be passed over for like 3 times. Why? Because in the end of '83, he went on record saying that the time we're losing the war, we need men. We need to start arming black men, and that really ruined his career. And even though he was killed at Franklin, he was never going to advance above the division rank, even though he was the best. But it wasn't just to the South that this feeling of not having white men, not having black men join the army. If you look at the poster, okay, what it doesn't say on there is white men only. It doesn't say colored men can't apply. Why? Because it was just understood that that was not going to happen. Black men fought in the American armies in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. But in those 2 decades before the Civil War, the 1840s and 1850s, the debate on slavery got uglier and uglier and uglier and uglier. And what did that do? That started to harden people's prejudice against black people. So by the time the Civil War came, there was no belief, except among a few abolitionists, that the black men should join the army, should be allowed to join the Union Army. Okay, Lincoln himself didn't want to see black men in the Union Army at the beginning of the war. All right, he had political reasons for it. Obviously, he had 4 slave states that did not secede from the Union. One of them being Maryland, which, if they seceded, would probably be a difficult problem for him to handle. Where Washington was. He also has a strong Democratic Party, and there was not much sympathy in the North for slaves. There was not much sympathy in the North for black people in the sense. So he was determined also that it was going to be a white man's war. Black people in the North, many of them felt that this was their opportunity. Now that there was a war between the North and the slaveholders, this was some of them thought that this was their opportunity. A free black man in Boston, around the time of Fort Sumter, he's going to send a letter to Simon Cameron, the Secretary of War, who, by the way, was not an abolitionist by any sense, and saying that that offering his support for the war. And Cameron wrote back and wrote this: this department has no intention at present to call into the service of the government any colored soldiers. Right out said no. Okay. Not every black man in the North was willing to fight because a lot of them felt, why would I want to fight for a country that deprived me of my basic rights? One of the most famous black voices in the North was Frederick Douglass. And at the time, in 1861, Frederick Douglass, when he was asked if he would join encourage black men to join the army, he said, not without a quid pro quo, not without giving us our rights. And this is what he's going to say in a public letter: nothing short of an open recognition of the Negro manhood, his rights as such to have a country equally with others, will induce me to join the army in any capacity. But like I said, he wasn't the lone voice. There were black men in the North who felt that this was their opportunity. If they could step up, defend their country, they will earn dignity and they will earn the respect of Northerners, and they will perhaps get raise their citizenship rights in this country. A lot of commentators, black commentators in the North, began to publish that this was our opportunity. Rise up. even though we don't have the rights, rise up and join the fight, because that will eventually we will achieve those rights. In cities like Providence, Rhode Island, Philadelphia, New York City, there was even small black units, militia units, starting to form up in the expectation that eventually Lincoln is going to call for them to serve in the army. They began to appeal again even more to the federal government to allow them to join. And one militia captain from Boston wrote this: "There's not a man." This is what he wrote in a paper. There's not a man who would not leap for his knapsack and musket, and they would make it entirely hot for old Virginia. They wanted to fight. Okay, one of these militia units that was forming up was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and they called themselves the Hannibal Rifles, and they were fully aware of the prejudices they were facing in the North, but they once again they wanted to join the fight, and they wrote a letter to the governor of Pennsylvania at the time, in that letter he said this: "Although deprived of all our political rights, we yet wish the government of the United States sustained through the tyranny of slavery, and we are willing to assist in any honorable way or manner to sustain the present administration. We therefore tender to the state the services of the Hannibal Guards." These appeals fell on deaf ears. No one was willing to start enlisting black troops. But as the war goes on, through that first year and that first year and a half, things begin to change. We all know what happened in 1861, early 1862. The North wasn't exactly, rolling in victories. The war was going badly. Battles like Shiloh, the 7 Days, are causing previously unheard of casualties. War weariness began to start to inflect through the northern population, and so surprisingly, by mid 1862, white manpower is starting to shrink in the Union armies. Men are not flocking to the colors in 1862 with the same enthusiasm they did a year earlier. So there's and some people started to look at that there was a manpower pool available in the North, a large manpower pool that we're not tapping into, and that obviously is the black population. Things began to change even more because as the Union armies started to move into the South, they're going to confront the problem. And what is that? The official position of the North at this point is this is not a war against slavery. This is not a war against the South's domestic institutions. But as the armies are moving into the South, into Virginia, into Tennessee, into those areas, and black slaves in plantations near them, they began to see the Union Army as salvation, as freedom, and they began to escape plantations and seek refuge in the Union armies. There's a lot of confusion in the early part of the war about what these Union commanders should do with these slaves coming in, because it was growing, it was starting to become a humanitarian crisis. Some of them returned the slaves to their owners. Some of them refused to do that. The man who changed the debate about it is a man you've all heard of, Benjamin Butler. Everybody's heard of him, I'm sure, right? Benjamin Butler was not a great general. I think that's fair to say. He was a great politician, though. He changed the debate. And how do you do that? Okay, at this point, he's stationed down in Fort Monroe. 3 slaves owned by a local plantation owner escapes into his lines, and that plantation owner shows up and demands that Butler return those slaves. He's got no authority to return them. He's got no authority to keep them. So what does Ben Butler come up with? The idea. He labels those black men contraband. Now, today, obviously, people would be insulted, but this is how we got around it. These men are contraband of war. And just like your cattle and your horses, if this is aiding you as a rebel in the Union Army, the Union Army has a right to confiscate that property. And that whole idea of contraband begins to grow. Okay. And what is what we're going to do, and eventually some of the out west are going to start to do, they're going to start to use these escaped slaves, this contraband, as labor for the Union Army. They're going to help build the fortifications. They're going to help build bridges, clear roads, whatever's needed. Okay, but the problem is this: it's growing, and it's not just military-aged, healthy men that are appearing in these lines. It's their wives, their children, elderly people. They're not going to be able to work on building fortifications, and they have to be fed and housed, and that starts to grow, and it becomes more and more of a humanitarian crisis for the North. In order to stop this, in order to address this problem, in June of 1862, Congress passes 2 acts. They passed the Second Confiscation Act, which codifies what Butler was doing, that slaves are contraband, and they're allowed that. Therefore, you have the right. We have the right to seize that property from the enemy. And the other one was called the Militia Act of 1862. And in that act, Congress declared that black men could join the armed services. Now, I'm sorry, this is July of 1862. So they opened the door to black men being in the armed services, okay? But this is July of 1862. What's Lincoln doing about slavery at this point, okay? He's already thinking beyond fight a war. This is a war to save the Union. Now it's going to be a war. He's thinking about emancipation. He delays it till after the Antietam campaign. So he does not react to that law. He will not start recruiting black soldiers, much to the frustration of a lot of people. Okay, he's just not ready. Okay, but finally, after Antietam, he issues the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, and then in January 1st, 1863, he signs the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, we've all gotten into debates about the Emancipation Proclamation because it didn't free all the slaves. It didn't free only free a few slaves. And we can get into the reasons for that. Number one, it was basically an executive order based on the contraband Second Confiscation Act of Congress. The other thing is this: Lincoln's not trying to alienate the border states, and remember, he doesn't think he's got the constitutional authority at this point to eliminate slavery. Okay, so everybody, whenever we learn about the Emancipation Proclamation, we always remember the most famous part of that the most famous paragraph, and that's this: all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then and thenceforward and forever free. We all heard that in the study. Very few of us ever look at the last paragraph of the Emancipation Proclamation. And that is this: and I further declare and make known that such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed services of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service. Lincoln has essentially declared that the Civil War is no longer just a white man's war. Black men can join the army, okay? But note the wording, okay? It doesn't say anything in that about, oh, by the way, they could be formed into combat regiments, and we're going to throw them into battle against the Confederates. That's not there. There is no intent at this point to create combat units. This is going to start to develop as the needs grow and the war changes. However, in the beginning, there's a decision made. Union soldiers, and you remember this part of the movie Glory, all right? Union soldiers were being paid. How much were Union soldiers being paid, right? $13 a month, okay? If you were hired, were hired by the Union Army to do manual labor, Teamsters, things like that, you were paid $10 a month. So the decision was made that because the intent was these black men were going to be Teamsters. They're going to be pioneers and sappers and building construction. They shouldn't get the combat pay of $13 a month. They should get the pay of $10 a month. And because they're black regiments, they should pay for their uniforms too. Okay, the Union white soldiers were paying $13 a month and given uniforms and given supplies. Black soldiers are going to be paid $10 a month, and take $3 a month is going to be taken out of their salary to pay for their uniforms and supplies. So black soldiers going into the army are going to be paid $7 a month. Remember the scene in Glory when they find out they're going to be paid $10 a month, and there's Denzel Washington starts a near mutiny. Okay, that's going to happen in several regiments as they're starting to form. This will be an issue that will go through most of the war, but eventually in 1864, the Congress will pass an act saying that that's not fair. That if you're in the Union Army, no matter what your color is, you will be paid the $13 a month. But the problem was, in order to get paid retroactively, you had to prove that when you enlisted in the Army, you were a free man. That you were not beholden to anyone. That you were a free man. Okay, if you didn't have those papers, you weren't getting paid retroactively. Okay, a couple of Union officers, one of whom was a member of the Quaker faith, very disturbed by that, and he came up with an oath that will go down as known as the Quaker Oath. And basically, it's a very simple oath that he was encouraging all black men to join, to say, and that is this: you do solemnly swear that you owed no man unrequited labor on or before the 19th of April, 1861. So help you God. He didn't care whether they were lying or not, but because they take that oath, they no longer had to prove they got manumission papers and proving they were born free. They would be paid retroactively. It wasn't until March of '65 that Congress got rid of that whole thing and not worried about it. They paid these men the $13 and they didn't have to prove anything when they wanted it. But that's going to plague black troops throughout most of the war. Okay, so how was this newfound thing that black men could join the Army? How was it received? Well, in the North, black population, I'm sorry, in the North, it was received very enthusiastically. Frederick Douglass, I already talked about how he was not going to have encouraged his fellow citizens to join the Union Army because we don't get our rights. The Emancipation Proclamation convinced him that Lincoln was of a sound mind, and he began to start to encourage men. Now's our time to join the Army. He's going to give a speech on March 2nd, 1863. One of his most famous speeches, by the way, in a long life, and it's called "Men of Color to Arms." And this is what he's going to say in that. He's going to say, "Liberty, won by white men, would lose its luster. Who would free themselves must strike the blow. Better even die free than to live as slaves. This is the sentiment of every brave colored man amongst us. I urge you to fly to arms and smite with death the power that would bury the government and your liberty in the same hopeless grave." Later on, he's going to write another letter, and this is going to be one of his more famous quotes regarding black troops in the Union Army, and how it's going to give these men dignity and respect. And this is what he says: "Once let the black man get upon his person the brass letters U.S., and let him get the eagle on his button and a musket on his shoulder and bullets in his pocket. There is no power on earth or under the earth which can deny that he had earned the right to citizenship in the United States." Soon, in the North, began to appear more recruitment posters. Yep, sorry. Why did this? Oh, okay. This one a little bit different than the first one I showed you. Men of color, rise up, join for 3 years service. Okay. Now the enthusiasm among the black population that they can now join the army was universal. Not every black man in the North was going to join the army. All right, they had the same issues that white men had. Men who had businesses, who had families, were not going to run to join the army, but they're going to be they're going to encourage other men to do just like what's happening in the white population. Okay. So there's a tension. They're trying to encourage now black men, the complete opposite from 2 years earlier. Federal government's trying to encourage black men to join. Obviously, they're not starting to do at the rate that they were hoping for, but they realize that there's a possible very large manpower pool out in the West, Mississippi primarily, Mississippi and Tennessee, where not just thousands, but tens of thousands of escaped slaves are now in camps or working for the Union government. And Edward Stanton, the Secretary of War, is going to send out his Adjutant General, Lorenzo Thomas, out to Mississippi to see what the pickings are out there, what he can do, if he can encourage men to do. And we're going to refer a little while later to what Thomas does. I want to talk about what was the reaction in the North among the white population. I mean, these are people who didn't want black men in the army. Well, by 1863, they really liked the idea. Okay, for a couple of reasons. Number one, if it's now, a lot of people felt if it's a war for slavery, well, then you better chip in and help too. All right, a lot of them were just happy that someone else is going to join through and join the service. And to be perfectly honest, there were a lot of men in the North who were just happy that now the cannon fodder for Confederate cannons are not just going to be white men. Let black men do that too. So there was a universal approval in the North. Again, a complete turnaround from the beginning of the war. How was it received in the South? As you can imagine, it was universally condemned. Okay, in the eyes of the Southerners, Lincoln's call to arm black men, in their eyes, he was declaring war on their women and children. These are men, the idea of armed black men before the Civil War was the South's most feared nightmare. The idea of servile insurrection. Now, these are people that grew up on Nat Turner's bloody rebellion in Virginia and earlier Denmark Vesey. And this hit a crucial nerve in the South. And because of that, Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, he's going to issue his own proclamation. And what is that proclamation? That proclamation is that if you're a black soldier fighting for the Union Army and we capture you, we're sending you back to your masters. And if you weren't a slave and you didn't know who your master was, we're just going to sell you into slavery. And then he goes on and says that any white officer leading a black regiment who's captured by us will be immediately executed for encouraging servile insurrection. Okay, well, obviously that's not a good situation. And President Lincoln, thank God for the war hadn't gone to that level yet, issued his own proclamation. And basically what he said was that any person, let me see if I can find it here. For every soldier of the United States that's killed in a violation of the rules of war, a rebel soldier will be executed in kind. Davis must have realized that he probably overstepped his bounds, and that never is going to happen. They're not going to purposely execute the white officers. They weren't going to be treated very kindly. That's for sure. Okay. Now, the problem is that up until this point in the war, as you guys know, there was a prisoner exchange. Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers who were captured in battle were being exchanged. There's a whole formula for that. You know, one colonel was worth 40 privates, things like that. Okay, that's going to break down only because the South would not recognize a black soldier as a soldier and will not exchange him for a Confederate soldier. And because of that, from this point on, the prison camps in the South are going to start to house a lot more men than they were originally designed for. We all grew up with Andersonville. One of the reasons Andersonville, there's a lot of reasons, don't get me wrong, but one of the reasons is it was never designed to hold 30, 40,000 soldiers. It was real, at one point, it was almost a transit camp as men are being exchanged back to the North. And now because there's blacks, the system broke down. So not only black soldiers being captured, but white Union soldiers are also going to pay a heavier price for it. Now, the North may have come to the idea and accepted the idea that black men can become soldiers. What they were not willing to accept was that black men can become officers. All right, so there was not good. So they were not going to let these men be run officered by black men. Throughout the war, only 110 black men serving in these units will become officers. Now that might sound, it's not bad, 110 men, except with one or two exceptions, and we'll talk about that in a minute. All these 110 officers were either surgeons or chaplains. That was it. Okay. Now, in the course of the war, in these black regiments, there will be over 7,000 white officers, as opposed to 110 men. The highest rank that was ever achieved. Well, we all know Denzel Washington became a sergeant, right? Yeah. The highest rank that was achieved was by a doctor, Dr. Alexander Augusta, who was breveted the rank of lieutenant colonel after the war. So there was one lieutenant colonel. He's actually, ironically, not ironically, but interestingly, he would be the first black veteran buried in Arlington after he died in 1890. But other than that, there was not very few. So it might be, as far as the officer corps was concerned, it was still a white man's war only. Okay. And obviously, these black men being recruited they're not going to serve in units with white soldiers. It's going to be a segregated army. Even before the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, there were some attempts to arm black soldiers. The earliest one was down in South Carolina. Major General David Hunter is going to start to form regiments out of escaped slaves in the Sea Isles down in Georgia and South Carolina. He didn't actually do it very kindly. It's not like you see in the movies. These guys weren't like flocking to join him. A lot of us had an element of press gangs, just putting these guys into units, and it was not going well. This was before Lincoln was ready to even talk about emancipation, and he put a stop to it very quickly. The most successful of the pre-Emancipation Proclamation regiments was formed in Kansas under the authority of Senator James Lane, who was a very strong-willed abolitionist, and he raised the first Kansas Colored Regiment, a state-sponsored regiment, which will become the first black unit to actually engage in combat in the American Civil War at the Battle of Island Mound on October 29th, 1862. Now, the biggest source of existing black units at the time that the Emancipation Proclamation was issued was in New Orleans, or New Orleans, however you want to say it. New Orleans had a very, very strong militia background going all the way back to the War of 1812. And because New Orleans had a somewhat more acceptable view of race, more moderate view of race when you compare it to the rest of the South, because it had a French, Spanish heritage. In some of these militia units that were formed in North Carolina, not only consisted of men, either black or men of mixed race, but their officers were also of mixed race. Ironically, when the Civil War broke out, and then eventually when New Orleans is going to be threatened by the Union Navy, one of these regiments, the largest one, offered their services to the Confederacy. They didn't accept it. And then shortly after that, the Union Army captures New Orleans. So that same unit turns around and probably with a lot better, but more agreeable to the soldiers. They offered their services to the Union Army, and they will be mustered into federal service as the first Louisiana Native Guards on September 27th, 1862. First black regiment mustered into federal service. Okay, because of the number of plantations in the area, eventually there were so many escaped slaves coming in that they were able to form 3 more regiments. Okay, coming in. So there will be the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Louisiana Native Guards, and they will be eventually brigaded into a unit called, excuse me, I don't speak French, but the Corps d'Afrique. Corps of Africans, I guess you could call it, okay? There was a very uncomfortable problem, though, and that problem, as you can imagine, was the fact that there were black officers in these units. Nathaniel Banks comes along. He is now the commander of New Orleans. He is not happy about that. His subordinate commanders are not happy about, and they begin a very, very unfair and very rigorous examination process to start to drive these black officers out of these units. One of the things that they regret that was the most unfair was the examiners tended to be of lower rank than the men that they were examining. But eventually he was able to drive black officers out of the 3 newer regiments that were formed, but not the 1st Louisiana National Guard. And so that unit, when it went into battle, and the first battle is going to be the battle of I just lost my train of thought. Port Hudson, Port Hudson, which will become the first major battle that black troops are fought in. The 1st Louisiana Native Guard is going to have black officers, and there's going to be all 4 of those regiments are going to fight at Fort Hudson. They're going to make a very, very violent attack against the Confederate entrenchments, suffer heavy casualties, but push in those units, in those entrenchments. Okay, there was a captain on that 1st Louisiana Native Guard, and his name was Captain Andre Callot, mixed race, 3 black parents, grandparents, and 1 white grandparent. Callot is going to lead his company into and over the Confederate entrenchments in the attack on May 23rd, I think it is. He's going to be shot in the left arm, and his arm is useless. He's bleeding extensively, and he won't stop. He grabs the flag and leads his men over the trenches and into the Confederate lines and drives them away. And then he's killed later in that attack. Medal of Honor type gallantry, but obviously you can't get the Medal of Honor if you die in the Civil War. You guys know that, right? If you die in the Civil, if you're killed in a battle in the Civil War, you're not eligible for the Medal of Honor. Yeah, I don't know if anybody guys knew that, but but even if it wasn't, he wasn't going to get it because he was black. Okay, how did Banks reward these guys? Well, he pressed harder. He soon all black officers from that 1st Louisiana Native Guard will be removed, and it will be an all white officered unit. Okay, but these soldiers had fought so well that their fellow soldiers and correspondents with the Union Army took notice of this, and began to realize these guys can't fight. They know what they're doing, okay? And the New York Times, the correspondent for the New York Times, he's going to write this. Okay, this settles the question that the Negro race can fight with great prowess. It is no longer possible to doubt the bravery and the steadfast steadiness of the colored race when rightly led. Here again, you got that kind of patronizing, they're good soldiers. They'll fight and die, but you got to make sure they're well led. And that was the position of a lot of so even after this valiant fight at Port Hudson. Okay. So as all this is going on, let's come back to the 54th Massachusetts. Okay. The governor of Massachusetts, John Andrew, a very, very committed abolitionist. He had been pushing Lincoln since the beginning of the war to allow him to raise black regiments, and obviously the Emancipation Proclamation got it. He's going to work with Frederick Douglass, who, by the way, wasn't a native of Massachusetts. He was from Rochester, New York. But he's going to work with him to form a black unit that will eventually become the 54th Massachusetts. It's going to be mustered into federal service on May 28th, 1863. Within those ranks will be two of Frederick Douglass's sons in the 54th Massachusetts. He's encouraging blacks from all over the North to join this regiment. And because of that, he soon found out that he had more recruits than could fit into one single regiment. And 2 weeks later, he's going to form another regiment. And that is what I said before, the 55th Massachusetts. But that's only the beginning, okay? I mentioned how they had seen this manpower pool out in the West. These thousands and thousands of escaped slaves. And Stanton sent out Lorenzo Thomas, his adjutant general, to look at the situation. And Thomas came back and said, there's a lot of potential out there to raise black troops. However, if we don't do it the right way, it's going to be chaos. So what did Stanton do? Stanton created a bureau of colored soldiers on May 22nd, 1863. So the Bureau of Colored Soldiers will be responsible for raising regiments among black soldiers, primarily not just in the West, but all throughout the North. Okay, this man you see here, his name is Major Charles W. Foster. Has anybody ever heard of him? He is probably the most successful recruiter in the American Civil War, because Foster was put in charge of this Bureau of Colored Troops, and his job was to arrange, to start to organize, and to create regiments, to create the administrative structure, to train them, to actually start to encourage white officers to come into the fight. He is 31 years old. He is as a young teenager fought in the Mexican War. He stayed in the Army until 1856, and then he left for other things, came back in the Union Army, but he never went to battle. He was always working in Washington, but this is the man that Stanton sends out there, and he will do a magnificent job. However, like Hunter in South Carolina, not all the enlistments were done very kindly. There was the element of press ganging among where they would just tell these men, okay, we have a good job for you. By the way, you're going to get a uniform. Now you're in the Union Army. So there was a lot of that going on. But he will be successful, okay, in raising 171 regiments for the fight for the Union Army. Okay, once this. Now, he's also responsible, like I said, for providing officers for these new regiments. And he wanted the best white officers, okay? And he created a very rigorous examination process to make sure that these men that he was raising had good officers. Not so much because he cared about the men, but once again, he felt that black troops poorly led would not do well. And he wanted the best in there, okay? And I talked about there was, 7,000? Every one of these Union soldiers were Robert Gould Shaw, okay? They weren't all there like saying, I want to uplift the black man. I want to do what I can for them. A lot of it had to do with, here's a good way that you could become a captain, a major, maybe even higher than, maybe you get your own regiment. So there's all the mix of stuff. So not every white officer, like I said, was who played him in the movie? Matthew Broderick. All right, there was a lot of people who probably could care less about their soldiers, more about their career. But Foster's actually going to create some pretty good regiments. Not a lot. There are some pretty bad ones, but some poor ones. Once that bureau is created, black regiments will no longer bear the state that name. the 54th Massachusetts and the 55th Massachusetts. From this point on, all black regiments will be known as the United States Color Troops. You will not see the 8th New Jersey. You will see 8th USCT. That's what they will bear. Okay. There will only be 6 regiments out of these 175 that will still bear their state number. They'll come up in a second. Okay. All right. Now, this might not seem like a big deal. Okay. What are you called the USCT or you're called the 29th Connecticut? But it is a big deal. Okay. These are the only 6 regiments that will bear their state title, the name of their state, once they're federalized, mustered into federal service. And this regiment here will only last for a couple days, and then it'll be merged into the 29th Connecticut. What's colored? What's the big deal about it? Okay. Throughout the rest of the war, this is going to be a bone of contention between federal northern governors and the Lincoln administration. All these governors are struggling with quotas. All of them have that problem. Okay. And the fact that these are now designated as federal units, the United States Color Troops. If you're recruiting out of Philadelphia, the governor of Pennsylvania wants credit. If you're recruiting in New Jersey, the governor of New Jersey wants credit to go to his quota, and that's not happening. Now, Andrew carried a lot of weight. So there was those 3 Massachusetts regiments. He was not going to allow to become USCT troops. He fought for that. The governor of Connecticut, I think it was Burlington, another strong, powerful abolitionist. He did the same thing. He's not going to let them not go against his quota. And this is going to be an issue throughout the war. It will not be until the end of the war that the Congress will finally start to allow quotas of USC troops to go to a particular state. The problem is, how do you know what state they're from? Right? And so, but it's a big, as silly as it would seem to us, this was a big issue for the governors of the North at that time. They wanted credit for their troops. Okay. Now, like their sister regiments, the actual experience and performance of these USCT regiments varied. Some of them perform exceptionally well. Some of them are terrible. A lot of you got to remember, a lot of these regiments that are being formed, particularly among from escaped slaves, many of these men are illiterate, and it's going to take a lot. It takes an exceptional officers to train these men to get them ready for combat. Some did well, some didn't do well. Just like I said, just like the experience of their white regiments. Okay, the one thing they all had in common. Every single one of these USCT and these 6 state-sponsored regiments was this. They all experienced almost grinding prejudice. I mentioned that in the beginning of the tour. They're going to be experiencing prejudice, not just from the enemy, but from us, you white soldiers that they fought. Every single one of those regiments, no matter how well they did in combat, no matter how well they were going to be praised, there's always going to be that lingering that you're not really soldiers. And like I said, this comes out very clearly in that movie, Gettysburg. But during the war, these black regiments, they participated in 449 separate engagements. Okay, I just came here a partial list of some of the bigger battles that they fight in the last 2 years of the war. With a total of 449 separate engagements that they will participate in. And this is going to range from small skirmishes involving a few hundred men into large battles. Some of the more famous ones, as you can see, Fort Hudson, I mentioned, Milliken's Bend, first time they're in combat. Okay, they're guarding a base along the Mississippi River during the Vicksburg campaign. 3 regiments who had just, by the way, received their rifles, and 6 days later, they're defending that base from a large Confederate attack and hold the attack off. People who noticed that, including Grant. I'm going to talk a little about Fort Pillow and the crater after that, and Oluste down in Florida, where both the 54th and 55th Massachusetts will fight, and they'll play a big role in the Battle of Nashville at the end of in December of 1864. They eventually they'll be brigaded together, and then as more units are formed, they will be part of they will be combined into divisions, and then there'll be one at the end of the war outside of Richmond. The 25th Union Army Corps will be 100% black, and the irony of that is it was the 25th Corps were the first Union troops into Richmond at the end of the war. So it was black troops that actually occupied Richmond. I'm sure the people of Richmond were thrilled by that.
Happened to a nicer group of folks.
During the war, there were at least 17 documented cases of atrocities committed against black soldiers by their Confederate enemies. Okay, that is there's probably a lot more smaller atrocities, but there are 17 where black soldiers were killed after they surrendered to the Confederates. Okay, from that, there are 2 on this list that stick out. The most famous of all is this one here, Fort Pillow, April of 1864. Fort Pillow was a small fort north of Memphis on the Mississippi River, and it was garrisoned by a black regiment. It was actually the 6th heavy artillery colored USCT, and 1 white regiment from Tennessee. Unfortunately, they didn't get along very well. Okay, and they're going to be attacked in April. I think it was April 14th, 1864, by none other than Nathan Bedford Forrest. His men. You've all heard of Nathan Bedford Forrest, right? Slave trader before the war, and he goes on one of the obviously a great cavalry commander, but he's the one who founds the KKK after the war. There's a lot of confusion about what happened at Fort Pillow, but when the fort was overrun, and of course it didn't help out that the day before the battle, both the white troops and the black troops in Fort Pillow were yelling out and kind of like taunting the Confederates, "Come and get us, come and get us." And unfortunately, they did come and get them. All right, and like I said, there's a lot of discrepancy about what actually happened. All right, did Nathan Bedford Forrest order his men to slaughter blacks? Were they killed during the fight? And there was some incidents afterwards. What we do know is he might not have ordered them to kill blacks, but he certainly didn't stop them from killing blacks. And why we're pretty sure that there was a massacre is because most of the dead were black. The white Union soldiers suffered a very small number of casualties. So that's going to be one of the most famous. Probably the ugliest one is this here, the crater outside of Petersburg in July of 1864. You guys all know about the Battle of Crater. The 48th Pennsylvania coal miners come up with the idea of digging a mine underneath the Confederate positions and blowing it up. And Grant gave permission for that. The unit that was supposed to attack after the crater was exploded was the 4th Division of the 9th Corps. 9th Corps being commanded by everybody's favorite Union General, Ambrose Burnside. Okay, the other 3 divisions in the 9th Corps were white. And the reason that the 4th Division, an all-black division, was decided to make this attack was because they hadn't fought during the Overland Campaign. Being a black division, they were guarding wagons. The other 3 white divisions had been decimated, so they decided they're going to this fresh unit, and they trained them what to expect. There's going to be an explosion. There's going to be a big hole in the ground. Do not go into the hole in the ground. One brigade's going to go one way, the other brigade's going to go the other way, and we're going to break right through the Confederate lines. And that's how they were trained, and they were ready to go. But before the actual event, orders were changed. It was decided not to use this black division. It was rather use one of the white divisions, okay? Why? There's a lot of controversies. A lot of it had to do with Grant and Meade did not believe in the attack, that it wasn't going to succeed, and they did not want to be accused by radicals, or they called them radical Republicans in Congress, of sending black men to their slaughter. Also, but there's also a belief that they didn't trust them, that they were not going to, they're competent enough to, because these guys were neutered into combat, that they wouldn't know what to do. And they were not going to use them. The bottom line is they were not used. Then, unfortunately, they picked one of the worst divisions by drawing a lot, had been heavily decimated, and their commanding officer was a drunk. And he was heavily involved with medicinal brandy that day. And when the explosion went off, these white troops didn't even know what to expect. And all of a sudden they advance and they come to a crater. And I'm sure you've all seen the movie Cold Mountain. That's what happened. These guys went into the crater. At this point in the war, these white troops are used to when they see the enemy get into cover, into trenches, and they see this crater, and it's where they go into. And it was a fatal mistake, because eventually the Confederates recover from this explosion, and they are going to surround the crater. As this is all going on, the decision is made by Ambrose Burnside to release the 4th Division. They're held in reserve at the time. By the time they begin to get through their own works, to begin to make the attack, it's too late. And they'll try to do what they're trained to do, go around the crater. But by this point, the Confederates have rallied, and most of them end up in the crater. Okay, the Confederate commander at this point is General William Mahone, Billy Mahone. We all, the guy that when his wife found out he had a flesh wound, he was a lot thinner than I am, and his wife found out he had a flesh wound and said, "It's got to be serious because Billy doesn't have any flesh." It's his men, and they start. They're angry that they're up against black troops, and they start to, they're fighting heavily. Black troops start to surrender, and his men start massacring, start killing black prisoners. Billy Mahone, Confederate general, it could have been a lot worse, because he actually saw this, and he started going, "Stop, we're not doing this." A lot of the soldiers didn't listen to him, but because it was that particular Confederate commander, the massacre wasn't as great as it could have been. Billy Mahone later in Reconstruction will be a very big proponent of black rights in Virginia. The sad part of this one is that in this crater, there's a mixture of white and black Union soldiers. And the white soldiers are panicking. They realize they're going to be taken prisoner. And many of them were panicking because they thought if they're being caught next to black soldiers, they themselves will be executed. Officers of these units started ripping off their epaulets so they wouldn't be recognized as an officer of the black units. And some of the white soldiers started executing blacks, so that they wouldn't be caught next to them. Okay, so these guys are, like I said, this is what they're going to experience throughout it. Okay, yeah. So by the time the war is over 179,000 black soldiers will fight in the Union Army. Most of them either free men or escaped slaves, and that doesn't count for the. Like I said, I didn't want to get into the Navy. Another 20,000 fought in the United States Navy during the war. Of the 175 regiments that were raised, 151 of them are going to be infantry regiments. Okay, which would make sense. But notice this, as the war went on, 6 cavalry regiments. All right, as you know, that's an exception. Cavalry regiments cost more money, more training, but 18 artillery regiments. And you would not think that, because that in the Civil War was the most technical and sophisticated arm of the Army. Yet they actually, by the end of the war, there were 18 black artillery regiments, roughly 179, 180,000 men. 36,000 of them who will die, most either in combat or they will die from disease. And another 40,000 will be injured. That combined total of 76,000 men out of the number of 179,000, that's a rate that's 35% higher than was experienced by white regiments throughout in the North throughout the Civil War. Okay, a lot of these men died of disease, which is sad because these regiments were formed in the last 2 years of the war. By that point in the war, the Union medical facilities were pretty sophisticated and white, and they were not expecting regiments to suffer the same ratio of disease, death by disease as they did earlier in the war. But yet these black regiments did suffer heavily from disease. Okay, the Colored Bureau is going to be disbanded at the end of the war. The Bureau is going to be expanded, closed, okay? But the regiments are still in existence. Most of them, as you saw in that poster, 3-year regiments, well, they're still in existence. Many of these USCT regiments will be sent down to Texas at the end of the war, because that's when Napoleon III was making his incursions into Mexico, and the United States government had to send a force down there, and it turned out a large percentage of that force is going to be black troops. They're going to spend some miserable time down in there, and then, ironically, because many of the white regiments are being mustered out of service, it's going to be USC troops that are going to be policing the early years of the Reconstruction in the South, which only causes probably more turmoil among the unrepentant Confederates. Okay, but they're going to spend a lot of time. The United States Army is going to remain a segregated force until 1947. When Truman integrates the armed forces. But between the Civil War and 1947, the black troop regiments are going to engage in every conflict in the United States is in at that time. And some of them will become very famous. The 9th and 10th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers out west. The 10th Cavalry, by the way, will storm San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt. They kept that quiet, but that was the other regiment that stormed San Juan Hill, the 10th Colored Cavalry. Okay. In World War I, I believe one of the greatest, this is just my opinion, probably one of the best units ever in the American Army, 369th Infantry Regiment, the famous Harlem Hellfighters, raised out of New York City. They will spend more time in the trenches than any other American unit, primarily because Pershing gave them to the French earlier in the war, and they became an exceptional unit. They come home. That big parade you see where the doughboys are marching through Washington Square Park, celebrating the victory over the Kaiser. The Harlem Hellfighters, raised out of New York City, were not allowed to march in that parade. They had their own parade up in Harlem at the time. Okay, and then obviously the most famous of all black units is the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II. I think the last one just died recently. I could be wrong about that. Okay, the men of the USCT, they fulfilled all their commitments and more than earned those rights of citizenship that Frederick Douglass and others claimed they should have and what they had earned. The fact that did not happen, and many of these veterans came home and experienced grinding racial prejudice, albeit without the curse of slavery, is probably the saddest end to their experiences, and that's something that we still deal with today. That's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this.
Standing.
The 55th Massachusetts. A lot of those guys came from Waverly, right?
Yes.
Pennsylvania. So that's probably why the governors were arguing, I want credit for these.
Yeah, and I was at a cemetery out in by Penn State, and there was a bunch of USC troops buried in there. They were all buried out of like one regiment, and that's why I was trying to find out.
I've been to Waverly. Have you ever been there?
No, I haven't
It's
been.
near Scranton.
Yeah,
A very nice place to visit.
I will. I'll go
It's,
there.
They were all from the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
All came up.
But I think the problem was, like I said, they were always going to be fighting. But you got to remember, I mean, even the white troops, Jersey soldiers fought in New York regiments, And the two governors would argue, the most famous obviously being California Brigade. And Edward Baker formed of he wanted a West Point, a West Coast brigade in the Union Army, in the Army of Potomac. And Lincoln, he was a good friend of Lincoln's, and Lincoln allowed him to raise a brigade. Unfortunately, where he raised them in Philadelphia.
One of the things also is the 55th that was in Fort Wagner. That was a very, you ever see the movie Glory?
Yes.
And that movie is fantastic.
That was the 54th.
The 54th?
I don't think was there.
I thought it was the 55th.
It was the 54th was there. Yeah.
Anyway, that movie is unbelievable.
Yeah, I know.
What they went through, the colonel said he wasn't gonna accept pay because they weren't paying his troops. And, he was holding them and they fought, and that was a really bad battle.
And like I said before, the movie took some liberties with the battle scenes, but what they experienced is pretty much what you read about that is pretty much dead on,
You're talking about some of the atrocities. I think the worst atrocity against troops happened at the Saltville massacre in Virginia, where members of, I forget now which, it was a black cavalry unit, were literally dragged out of hospital beds and murdered.
I didn't know that, but yeah, thank you.
In fact, the Confederate commander who ordered that was the second of the only two Confederates that were killed for war crimes.
I thought there was only one that was killed.
No, he was, I'm trying to remember his name.
Howard Stowers was the only one that was killed for war.
Actually, it was a guerrilla commissioned a captain in the Confederacy who ordered his men to drag soldiers out of
I'm glad
the.
you told me that. I can't tell you how many times I've told people that only one man. was-
Yeah, that's.
Thank you. I'll have to look that up now,
Anybody else? No?
yeah. Okay.
Superb.
Yeah.
Okay, let me turn this recording on.
You there, Russ?
Champ Ferguson.
Jersey,